evening, ladies and gentlemen. These lights are so bright, I'm not sure whether you're out there or not, but I did see you when I was coming up the stairs, so I guess you are. And I want to thank you all for being here this evening, faculty members and students and friends of the university. We're about to have the second presentation in the Riall Lecture Series. As you know, Pauline Riall was a teacher here for some 20 years. And I'm sure that many of you out there who knew her remember her gracious presence here as a warm and very talented individual. Tonight we celebrate her professional life. Thanks to her benevolent generosity and certainly her intense concern that Salisbury State continue to have as its hallmark excellence in education, allows us or enables us to bring to this campus nationally known and highly accomplished educators from throughout the nation, such as Ernest Boyer, who was here in September, and tonight the Undersecretary of Education, Linus Wright. I'm sure that you are as anxious as I to hear the observations from the Undersecretary. I'm sure he will share with us a national perspective. And so without further commentary, I would like to ask Dr. Morris Bosman, whom, by the way, I also would like to thank publicly for arranging these lectures, to come to the podium and introduce our speaker.
As our second distinguished speaker in the Pauline Riall Lecture Series, it's an honor to present the Undersecretary of the United States Department of Education, Linus Wright. Dr. Wright was nominated by President Reagan as Undersecretary for the U.S. Department of Education in October 15, 1987. He was confirmed by the Senate in November and sworn in on November the 24th of that year. He advises the Secretary of Education on all major program and management issues. From August 1978 to his appointment as Undersecretary, Dr. Wright had a reputation in Dallas as a consensus builder with an ability to get along with all segments of the community, as well as one of the premier experts on school finance in Texas. Previously to that, Dr. Wright was superintendent for the administration for the Houston school system from 1974 to 1978 and was chief finance officer from 1971 to 74. His professional experiences have included coaching, teaching, principal, business administrator, infantry officer in the United States Army, and 21 years in the Army Reserve. He's received numerous awards, including an honorary Doctor of Law degrees from Abilene Christian University and Austin College. It's a pleasure to present Dr. Wright, Undersecretary of the United States Department of Education, who will speak to us on education and reform. Where are we headed? Dr. Wright.
Dr. Ballamy and Dr. Bosman, thank you for that very generous introduction. I agree with you, Dr. Vance, that light is bright, but I understand we're being taped, so we'll have to tolerate it. It's great to be here on your campus. I want you to know that I left Washington, D.C. at noon today and just arrived. I wanted to get here in time to see your beautiful campus. And, of course, Dr. Bosman and the staff and Dr. Vance's wife and other members of the staff had a wonderful dinner at which we were late, and we got to Vienna, and we had a one-way bridge facing us, which we didn't know, but it took us an hour and a half to get across it, so we feel lucky that we're here. But it's great to be here on this campus. I've heard a lot about things that are happening here, and certainly I'm happy to be a part of this lectureship series. I want to talk about where we are in education today, and I understand the audience, although I can't see you, and that's difficult to talk to, an audience that you can't see. That's almost as bad as looking into the television and or the camera and trying to talk to an audience that you know may be there or may not be there. But education is going through some interesting times. You know, the thing that we are concerned about today is the status of elementary and public education. I'm happy to say that our colleges and universities are the best in the world, and we're having very few problems there. Certainly we always will have some, but very few compared to the problems we're suffering in elementary and secondary education in this country. It's become such a social issue that both presidential candidates, Vice President Bush and Governor Dukakis, have said that they both want to be the educational president. It won't be long till we'll see which one of them has that opportunity. But they're all concerned about where we are in education today in this nation. And certainly I know, and having been a product of our public school system and having been a teacher and administrator for 40 years, have been a part of the system and have been able to observe what's taken place. I know we have some students that are aspiring to become teachers, and I certainly would encourage you to do that, because I don't know of a greater profession than the teaching profession. If I were to choose again a career or profession, I would certainly choose education for my professional career. But let me just talk about some things for a moment that will outline the status, and then I want to talk about what I think we can do about it. And as I talk about the status, I hope you don't think I'm a prophet of doom, because I'm not. I'm hopefully will bring you some encouraging things that we can address. But in addressing any problem, you have to analyze the problem and know where you are and how you're going to solve the problem and where you're going to go from there. And today, as we look at the status of education in this country, you talk to any corporation, talk to any businessman that employ people, and they will tell you that the majority of the students that are graduating from our public school system today are not employable. And they base that on fact, not fiction. And that's the strange thing about us here in this country, is that we spend more for our education than any country in the world and achieve the least. And we are concerned about that. The concerns that people like New York Telephone talk about, Xerox Corporation, or any of them say that 4 out of 5 high school graduates that apply for minimal job entry skills or jobs can pass a minimum proficiency test in the basic skills of reading, writing, computation, communication, and so forth. And that they have to spend $25 to $40 billion a year retraining our graduates in the basic skills before they can become employable. Now that's a serious indictment. And of course it's a serious indictment as we look at the employment force that we have in this country today and what the needs will be at the turn of the century as we move into a new technology, information kind of society from the old industrial manufacturing type, and where jobs will require a higher level of education than they've ever required before. Now the difference being, the generation of youngsters that are coming through our public school system today that drop out of school have a difficulty finding a place in the workplace like their parents, because they look at their parents and they say their parents were successful. They could find a job, although they were school dropouts, and have been reasonably successful in our society today, but that is not happening to the new generation. You've also heard it said that this is the first generation of young people that's less educated than their parents. That's never happened in our country before, because always before, every generation has become more educated, better educated than the generation before. So this again has posed some problems for society. I don't have to tell you that the middle class society that we know of in this country started at the beginning of this century. And unless we reverse the trend of literacy in this country today, then in all likelihood we could reduce that or absolutely eliminate a middle-class society by the end of this century, because we have a broad gap in the educational level of the workforce today and the jobs that are being required to be filled. We have an unemployment rate, but that's not really relevant to the problem that we have. The problem we have is the young people are not equipped or educated with the skills that they need to enter the job market that's available today. Now that is the problem basically that we have, and it's a concern, because what it means is that jobs are going to other countries. Already we find that most of the things that are of electronic nature are manufactured somewhere else. Many of the cars are manufactured somewhere else or produced somewhere else and brought into this country. And so the business force, the corporations, have made this not only their number one issue, along with the president and the vice president and everyone else. It's a concern that we have in our public school system. Now then, some of the things that I feel that we're going to have to do to address that are these. One, the reason we are where we are is because of the low standards that we've had in our public school system for the last 25 or 30 years. This was first brought to our attention in 1983 in the Commission on Excellence in Education. It was appointed by President Reagan, in which a report was issued titled A Nation at Risk. And in that report, it pointed out that 50% of the states in our nation, high school graduation requirements were so low that they couldn't enter accredited college or university like Salisbury State University today. Now that is a serious indictment. The rationale or the reason for that, no one knows. But what we found from that report is that half of the states were only requiring 2 years of math, 2 years of science, 3 years of English, no foreign language, 2 years of social studies for graduation from high school. Well, in the math area, one of those could be a business arithmetic and first-year algebra, which is hardly enough to enter a college or university, and particularly if you're going into a professional field. 2 years of science, likewise, 3 years of English and social studies and so forth. So we found that standards had to be increased, so we came out with a recommendation that states start some form of educational reform in their states. And I'm happy to say that at least 44 states have implemented some form or some system of reforms. Not all of them are adequate, but they certainly are better than what they were 5 years ago. In that, we issued from the Department of Education approximately a year ago a curriculum that we call the James Madison High School Curriculum, which we propose to be a model curriculum. The federal government can't mandate anything, but they can recommend a model curriculum, and that model curriculum was this, that we recommended that every high school youngster in this country, regardless of what field, what career, what profession they were going to pursue, that to survive and have upward mobility in our society, that they would need the minimum knowledge of 4 years of English, 3 years of math, 3 years of science, 3 years of social studies, 2 years of foreign language, etc., just to survive in the nation that we know. Now that sounds rather stiff, and we've had a lot of criticism that there are a lot of students that can't comprehend or can't master or can't achieve that level of curriculum. And I would have to dispute that, because I can show you high schools all over this nation, rich, poor, black, white, brown, whatever, that can and are achieving a curriculum like that. I give you a good example of a high school named Garfield High School in Los Angeles, California. 90% Hispanic, 90% at the poverty level, and we have students there that are passing calculus and physics and chemistry and doing it well because they have the kind of curriculum that they need and the kind of teachers that can motivate and inspire them to want to learn. The high standards is not the problem. The students is not the problem. The problem that we're experiencing is the lack of interest and the lack of motivation, the lack of encouragement on the part of students, with high expectations on the part of our staff expecting students to perform. Certainly there are a lot of other problems that go along with that, and that's an oversimplification, I admit. But I simply say to you that the majority of our students in this country, I don't care whether rich, poor, black or white or brown, can achieve that level of curriculum. Another area that we have a weakness in our curriculum is the content itself. It's been pointed out over and over again. If you've read the book by Checker Finn and Diane Ravitch, they talk about what a 17-year-old knows in this country and the lack of literacy in the area of history and geography and so forth. And you have probably observed on some of the TV shows the demonstration of this lack of knowledge that our adults over 17 years of age, particularly the age between 75 and 25, and what they know in the area of geography and history. Well, why is that so important in our society? It's certainly a weakness. We recognize that because in our country today, only 17% of our high school youngsters are studying any form of geography. Only 50% are studying any form of world history. All of them study American history at least for 1 year. But how well equipped will these students be in the future to help determine foreign policy if they know nothing about their neighbors to the north, to the south, to the east, to the west, and they know nothing about the history of the past and how we won our independence and how we fit into this universe? Certainly there's a weakness in our curriculum in many areas, and we can go to the math and science area and find just as many weaknesses, and that's why the content area has to be reinforced. It has to be higher standards for our young people at the high school level. Well, the other thing that we have to do is to try to recruit teachers. Certainly we have some of the best qualified, best trained teachers we've ever had in the history of education. But at the same time, we have the most difficult clientele to educate that we've ever had as well. It's kind of like the gap between the labor force and the workforce. Well, we have a gap now between the training of teachers and the clientele that we teach. And I guess our teachers today have the greatest challenge they've ever had in education. And that challenge comes in this form. It comes in a pluralistic society. It comes in a student body that can't speak English. It comes in a student body that has had very little teaching of values and morals and character at home. It comes in the form of students not having the desire or the motivation or to want to learn. And this we are experiencing in our public school system today, and that's what makes it so challenging for our teachers. And I would submit, Dr. Bozeman, that our colleges and universities, and particularly the colleges of education, are going to have to take a hard look at this in developing the future training for teachers in our public school system. Well, teachers are next the most important people in the education process. The parent comes first. The parent is the first teacher. The parent has the responsibility for education. Certainly our teachers in our schools have the responsibility for enforcing and encouraging and reinforcing the educational needs of all of our youngsters. So unless parent and teacher can work together, then very little will be accomplished with the kind of student that I just described. I did a survey among our middle schools and high schools in Dallas a few years ago to try to determine why they were dropping out of school, why they were not passing all their courses, and half of them said this: I'm not passing because I don't have anyone who cares whether I pass or not. My parents don't care. My teachers don't care. There's no one who's really concerned with me as a human being of whether I pass and succeed, and I have a difficult time seeing why education is important. Well, that's a sad commentary for our young people today. I read an article not too long ago that talked about the value of our children in our society today. There was a time that we thought they were the most valuable asset that we have, and I still feel that they are. But this article said, and this was a survey that was conducted by Gallup not too long ago, it said that 1 out of 4 parents gave adequate attention to their children. Adequate attention meaning the love and the nurture, the guidance, the direction, the motivation, the inspiration of being involved with them in all the activities of their life to make sure that they succeeded in school. And you've read the same research that I've read by a sociologist at the University of Chicago, and I'll think of his name in just a moment, but who did a survey in 28 different countries to determine the greatest influence on a child's life. And as you would expect, it was the parent. The parent still has the greatest influence on a child's life in our society. And then to say that 75% of our young people today are entering the classroom with a feeling that they're not being supported or loved or nourished or nurtured by their parents or by their teachers. Can you imagine the difficulty that that presents in the typical classroom across this country? Something we're going to have to get a handle on. Well, another thing that we're going to have to do, and I just thought of this afternoon as I was writing an article about the community involvement in education, is there was a time when a city like Salisbury was a much smaller city, and the students walked through the town to get to the school because it was that small. And the merchants knew these young people, and they knew the merchants, and they knew the parents. Everyone knew each other. And education has always been a community responsibility, not just the schools, but a community responsibility. Everyone was involved in education. But as we have grown into larger cities like Salisbury and Washington and Dallas, that doesn't happen any longer. And young people don't have the attachment or the association with other people other than their parents or their teachers in most cases. You see what a gap that we have developed here in our educational process for our young people. And now then we have to find a way to fill that gap, and another way to do it is to create more parental involvement in the schools, to create more community involvement in our public schools so that these young people not only have the experience of seeing other role models, but the experience of seeing and relating to other people other than their teacher or their parents. And certainly the community has a responsibility for education. I say to all of our corporate people in Dallas, Washington, and everywhere else, you should have education as your number one priority. Because if you're really concerned about economic development, it starts with education. It starts with education. Because the opportunity of a young person in our society today and the upward boundness starts with the level of education they have. And so if a young person wants to succeed in our society, then they have to see to it that they receive a level of education that they can move through our society and take advantage of the opportunities that we have. It was Thomas Jefferson who first called our attention to the level of education that we need to live in a free democratic society. He said to think that we're going to continue to be free and uneducated is an unrealistic expectation, because the only way we're going to remain as a free nation, as a prosperous nation, as a nation of people that have enjoyed the high standard of living of any society that we know, then we have to continue to increase and improve the level of education for all of our people, for them to have equal access to the quality of life and to the other things that our society provides for all of us. So we must tell our business people, you do have an investment in education. It is critical that you get involved and see that education prospers, because it's the future employee that's going to make a good investment in this community, that's going to improve the quality of life in this community or any other community. So everyone benefits from education. It's probably without question And I have a background in economics as well as education, but it's probably the best investment that we'll make in this nation, and that is to invest in our young people, the natural resources, the human resources that we have, because it's through them that we achieve everything that we have in this great nation of ours. No one wants to see this nation go down and be concerned about its employment ratio, to be concerned about the quality of life, to be concerned about all the problems that we're experiencing in our society today that are primarily related to the lack of education. We can't afford, as a society, not to invest in education. I was just reading a Department of Labor brochure the other day in which they were relating literacy or illiteracy to all the problems of the lack of employment, the problems in our prison systems, the problems of teenage pregnant girls, and so forth. And they gave such startling statistics as this: 85% of all the teenage pregnancies are girls that are basically illiterate, girls that have already dropped out of school or will drop out of school. 68% of the arrests are by people who are basically illiterate or functionally illiterate. You associate crime, you associate all the social problems that we know, including drugs, and you find that the highest percentage of participants have probably been determined to be illiterate or functionally illiterate. And they're trying to find a way to survive. They can't get a job, so they resort to crimes. They can't relate to other people, so they resort to drugs. So education is so critical, and that's why I would say to the students here in this audience tonight, if you want to really take on a mission in life, if you really want to take on a service to mankind and get the greatest fulfillment out of life, then become a teacher. Because the greatest challenge that we've ever had is in the area of teaching today in our elementary and secondary schools of America. It is something that I feel that we're going to overcome, because for the first time we have created an awareness in this country, have called attention to the people that education is critical and that we have a problem that we must resolve, and that if we're going to attack the drug problem, if we're going to attack the criminal problem, if we're going to attack the unemployment problem, if we're going to attack any problem, that its grassroots will start with education, and what a good job or how well we do with educating our young population. Let me just throw out a couple of other items, and then I'm going to stop and answer whatever questions I can that you might have. Not only do we have 20 to 27 million illiterates or functional illiterates in our workforce today, but we're turning out another 1 million to 1.5 million every year into the workforce that's illiterate or functionally illiterate, because we have in this country 700,000 dropouts a year. We have another 700,000 that graduate from high school, but even though they have a diploma, they're still functioning at the 5th or 6th grade level, and still not a high enough level to achieve the kind of job that they need above a minimum wage. If we're going to be upward mobile in our society, then we're going to have at least 75% of every youngster in this country with a minimum of a high school education to fill the job market of the future. Because I'm told by the Department of Labor that there won't be that many jobs that will call for unskilled, uneducated people to fill. And isn't it a shame? And we're concerned about the good jobs disappearing today. Well, it's not that the good jobs are disappearing and the high-paying jobs. It's that we don't have the people that can fill those jobs, because if they've been working in some other industry, they have to be retrained before they're eligible to move into another good-paying position. And education is the solution, whether it's elementary, secondary, adult education, college, universities, or whatever. It is our greatest challenge in this country today. And I feel very hopeful that we're going to accept the challenge and that we're going to find the solutions to the societal problems that I just described, and that we're going to produce the caliber teachers in universities like this one that's willing to take on the responsibility of solving the problems that we have in education. We've enjoyed the high standard of living in the past, and we want to enjoy it again in the future. And we'll do it with your commitment and your help and your involvement in making our educational system better than what it is today. I want to thank you for the opportunity of being here, and certainly we'll open it up now and try to answer any questions that you might have, if I can see you. If I move away from the light, the camera can't get me, so I'm stuck. Can you help me, Dr. Bozeman?
Less than a month ago, or about a month ago, another speaker at that podium suggested that one of the solutions to problems in education is to look at the school calendar, the pattern of going to school throughout the year, perhaps adjustments in the school day, because of demographic and sociological changes in this country. Address that as a possible solution to the problem.
The question was, a month ago, someone in this rostrum said that changing the school day, the school year, et cetera, might help solve the problem. It might contribute to the solution, and certainly one of the problems that we have in this country is that we do have the shortest school day, the shortest school year of any country that we compete with. And I don't think we have any greater intellectual ability than they have, and that's one reason why we're falling behind with people like Japan and West Germany. Is Japan goes to school 240 days a year, 8 hours a day. Our youngsters go to school 6 hours a day, 175 to 185 days a year. Now then, what would we do with the additional time? Well, certainly we need to expand our knowledge that we're presenting in the areas that I just described, because where we're proposing 3 years of mathematics at the high school level, they have 5 and 6. And same thing in science and other areas. So it's going to be very difficult for us to compete in the area of technology without more training in this particular area. It's going to be difficult to do that in our country because changing tradition is the most difficult thing that we face in any change that we make. Certainly, I would say from my experience that we need more time, or we need to use the time we have more efficiently. But we certainly need to be able to present more content area in the time that we have, because when our youngsters rank 13th out of the 13 free industrial nations in biology, 10th in math and science, then it's going to be very difficult for us to compete. And I think whatever that person probably had those things in mind when they suggested that. But I would say that it'll be a long time before we'll have it. Yes, sir. If I understand your question, is violence in the school is disrupting. Can somebody relay that? I didn't get it all.
I think he's asking how you're going to have an effective educational system when the ambience in the school system is so threatening to the students, violence, drug use, and so on.
Okay. The question, as I understood it, is how you're going to have a good educational system with so much violence going on in schools today. Now then, that doesn't happen in every school. It happens in too many of them. But I would agree with you. Where you have that, you're not going to have a good educational system, and you can't present a good educational system. But I would submit to you that I can show you high schools in this country in the poorest neighborhoods in any ethnic group that you want to find, and they're having a phenomenal success. And they're having that kind of success because, one, their parents don't tolerate that kind of behavior at home, and they don't tolerate it at school, and the school doesn't tolerate it, and they have high standards and high expectation. And I would say to you, in my 40 years of experience, I've never faced a class of students yet that wouldn't live up to a teacher's expectation. Now, there's always that exception, but I can show you teachers and principals and schools that are having an unusual success with all kinds of students, and it can be done. The school I just quoted a moment ago, the Garfield High School in Los Angeles, is having that success. We have one in Washington, one that's having that kind of success. I was just day before yesterday visited another Garfield school in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. It's an elementary school. And this elementary school is right in the heart of the downtown black community. 85% of the people in that school are at the poverty level. And 2 years ago, that school was having the kinds of problems that you just described, even in an elementary school. 2 years later, with a change of principal and change of leadership and a commitment, then I presented that school an award because they have completely turned that school around. And although it's an elementary school, 90% of those schools were achieving above the national average in math and reading. And that has all happened in 2 or 3 years. Now then, it takes that kind of leadership, that kind of commitment on the part of teachers, and certainly involvement of the parents and the business community to change that. And what I'm saying to you, there's enough examples of success in our country that there's no reason for any of them not succeeding. There are at least 4 similar kinds of studies that have proposed changes in teacher education. I don't know that I could accept that one. I think it requires a minimum of 4 years, and I would like to see a 5th year of a teacher serving as an internship on the job under the supervision of a master teacher, and not given a certificate until they have proven that they have the ability, have the desire, and can become a good teacher. And that's involved more than just subject matter, content matter, and methods of teaching. I think it takes a minimum of 4 years with a strong background in the content area that they're going to teach, and with them serving as an internship at least a year would be my preference. And certainly I would encourage every teacher to go on and receive a minimum of a master's degree, because I feel the knowledge that they acquire and the experience is needed in teaching in our society today. Of course, one of the great concerns that we have with the elementary teaching program is when we expect a teacher to have a self-contained class and teach 8 to 10 different content areas, it's very difficult for a person to become proficient enough to instruct students in every content area. In my experience, I've seen that a teacher teaches to their strengths. If they are strong in math, students generally get more instruction in math. They're strong in reading, they get more instruction in reading, and so forth. And we're going to have to take a hard look at our elementary preparation program, elementary teacher preparation program. And there are several ways to do it, and I'm not advocating any one solution, because I've seen people be successful with many different kinds of approaches of organization and structure and so forth at the elementary level. But elementary is where we're having our greatest difficulty. Yes, sir. Well, I think you probably put your finger on the greatest problem we have in society, and it's beyond the classroom. It has to start with the parents, and then unless we can get back to a point where parents accept their responsibility and accept the training in the area of values and character, then we're not going to change that. But you just named the evidences that are a result of our lack of having character education and value training in the schools. Certainly we have to do it without religion because of the separation of church and state, but you can teach a lot of values through history and through literature and through examples by teachers. But our greatest concern is that we're not doing any of those. We're not taking advantage of the stories and history to teach about honesty and integrity of past leaders like Lincoln and Washington and so forth. And we're not using examples of the literature that we have to instill in our young people the kinds of things that they need to know that are valuable in their life, or that we can't always guarantee that a teacher is going to instill these in our young people or provide a good role model themselves. And you can't do it without all three. You can't do it in the home. You can't do it in the classroom. Yes, ma'am. How we can motivate students? Yes, I do. Gets back to the gentleman's question just before you. It has to start from the time a child's born. And I can assure you that if a mother does not cuddle and love and express the kind of feelings for a child at that age, the time they get to be 2 and 3, and there's no interest shown in their concern about education and what's going to become of them, or directing them as to how they're to become that, then when that student gets to school, they've already formed an attitude that education is not important because it's not important to the parent. And that's why it has to start with the parent being the first teacher. And then that has to be reinforced by the teacher when that child enters school. And then you have to work with the parent constantly to make sure it's continued to be reinforced. And that's the way you motivate and inspire a youngster to want to learn. You show them by example of what's important, what's not important, how to achieve it, and you stay with them until they develop that trait, and trait later develops into character, and character later develops into a desire to want to do the right thing. Yes, ma'am. Well, let me try to answer that and then throw in another plug along the way on the matter of choice. And of course, choice that parents have is their legal choice, legal right And of course, a parent can opt to go to a private school, parochial school, or a public school. And of course, the Department of Education has the responsibility for all education. Yes, there's declining enrollment in some cities in the private and parochial schools, and it's caused by two things, in my opinion. One, economics, that they're becoming so expensive that parents can't afford it. And in some areas, you see an improvement in the public schools where they're coming back into the public schools because of we've gone through an era of desegregation, we've gone through an era of distrust, we've gone through an era of all kinds of problems in the public schools. But still today, with all of that, there's only about 10 or 11% of the students in the country in either private or parochial school. 89 to 90% are in public schools. But I think there's a place for all. And I think we are trying to bring public education back around to where private and parochial education has been all along. And that is to make sure that we have the kind of education that we can recommend to every parent, that they would be proud to have, and that will help develop the kind of people that won't grow up to be corporate inside traders and so forth, and create the kinds of crime that we read about every day. But I don't see schools being in competition with each other, never have. I think that's a parent's choice. They are entitled to that choice, and they can let them go wherever they want to go. But I would hope that in public education, since I've been a part of that for 40 years, that we could make public education so good that every parent would want to send their child to a public school. But I certainly don't envy private or parochial schools, because I think they've been doing an outstanding job, and I would encourage them to continue doing it. Yes, ma'am. The elementary school or the high school? Well, there's a Garfield High School and a Garfield Elementary. Okay. Let's start with a high school. Here's a high school with 2,500 to 3,000 Hispanic youngsters, or 90% of them, and just happens that 90% of them are at the poverty level. As a general rule, 50 to 60% of those students have been dropping out of school for the last, well, for as long as we can remember. They have reduced that dropout rate in the last 5 years to about 25%, and their goal is to reduce it to no more than 5% in the next 5 years. And the way they have done it is not the way that most people would think. A lot of people have reduced and watered down their curriculum, made more elective courses available, and catered to the students. This school did just the opposite. They brought in a principal that was a disciplinarian, a strong instructional leader, and hand-selected their staff, a staff that wanted to be in a central city environment, put in a curriculum like the one I just talked about as a model curriculum, and expected students to achieve. And they followed up with the students when they misbehave. Instead of suspending them, they created alternative centers to place them in, and until they were ready to be placed back into the regular classroom. And my position is that they have proven my theory right, is that youngsters, I don't care what age they are, will live up to expectation if provided the right motivation, if provided the right inspiration, and are disciplined when they need to be disciplined, and someone follows up when they go astray and does something about it, because they soon learn their lesson. That school was completely covered with graffiti. It was filthy. The grounds were filthy, everything around it, before this last principal came on board. Now it's a clean school, freshly painted, not a mark on it anywhere. The grounds are clean. The kids have a pride in their school, and all of that is developed over a 3 to 5 year period. That's the key. You have to have a leader that helps form it, organize it, and provide the leadership and direction, and knows how to do it. And I have been a principal several years myself, and I would wish we had all of our principals like that, but we don't. We don't have all of our doctors like that either. We don't have all of our lawyers like that or all of our corporate presidents.
Is anything being done to make that more realizable?
Yes. The Principals Association themselves and the Administrators Association are working with colleges and universities all over this country in organizing what we call, well, I'll think of the name, but anyway, it's a center in which people can go and be retreaded, retrained to get into this mode that I just described. Some can do it and some can't, but at least there's an effort to try to convert and try to retrain principals as well as teachers. Yes, ma'am. That's probably the biggest movement going on in education today. For lack of a better name, I'll call it campus-based management, but it really boils down to placing more local control on the school campus. Because what we have found out in this country is that you can't legislate on high these things that I just talked about. I mean, you can set standards and you can develop a curriculum, but you can't guarantee it'll happen. If it's going to happen, it'll happen on the campus with the principals, the teachers, and the parents working together. It won't happen in the central office. It won't happen in the superintendent's office. It won't happen in the governor's office or anywhere else. So there are a large number of schools today that are piloting what I call campus-based management, and what it involves is that they have selected a principal, that they have confidence that has the leadership skills as well as the academic skills, and given that principal the authority to recruit their own teachers, to hand select the teachers that will fit into that kind of environment and have the commitment, and also allow them to work together with parents in planning their curriculum, planning their goals and objectives, planning their budget, in other words, taking complete control of their destiny within broad board policies and state laws and so forth. And those pilot programs are proven to be very successful. In fact, the Garfield Elementary School that I didn't describe is that kind of a school. And even the high school somewhat, but not exactly as I just described. But we have Dade County, Florida, that has 40 schools that are operating like that. Maryland, Montgomery County, Maryland, is going to have several schools next year operating like that. Up in Rochester, New York, there's several schools operating. Chicago is thinking about it. Several cities are looking at that model as a possibility of turning this thing around. Because when, let's take my own personal example, I had 200 schools in Dallas. Well, to turn 200 schools around in a year or two is an impossible task. But if you can get the kind of staff that I just talked about and give them the freedom and let them do it individually, then you can do it in a year or two. And I think we're finally learning that after a while. Yes, ma'am. Well, the question is, how can you, a teacher, motivate a child when they're not receiving anything at home? And that's a very difficult challenge. And the possibility, it can happen. Now, the way a lot of schools are doing it today are through surrogate parents with volunteers coming into the school and signing them one-on-one responsibility to look after that student for the entire year. Because the teacher has 25 students or more or less to look after. And if you examine the time on task that a teacher has with a student, I don't care what grade level it is, the typical student-teacher relationship, direct relationship, if you do it equally and equitably, won't be more than 10 or 15 minutes a day per student. And a young person can't survive with no more direction and supervision than that. And so that's why it's important that you have parents involved or volunteers involved to help a teacher with that situation. Certainly a teacher can go a long way and can do a great deal, and some even have been able to do it with the entire class, but it's an unusual person that can do that. But I would say to you that if you find yourself in that situation, that you try to get volunteers of other parents to come in and help work with that youngster. Because what typically happens in a classroom of 25 students is, if you will observe carefully, there'll only be no more than 25% of them actually participating with the teacher. The rest of them are off on the side, daydreaming or doing something other than being involved or participating in the process. And so unless a teacher can find a way to keep that student involved, then it's going to be very difficult to form, shape, motivate them, or whatever you need to do to help them be successful. And that's why teacher aides have been so critical and so important. That's why volunteers have helped out a great deal, and that's why we need, particularly today in our society, more community involvement in our schools to help a teacher with that kind of a problem. Because students learn more by what they see than what they hear. They see a person doing something and they want to do it. They can hear it and then see that person do something different than what they've been instructing, and it's very damaging to a young person. Yes, ma'am. Okay. May I respond to your statement first? I don't think it's all negative either. There's certainly some good examples. But what I'm talking about is education as a whole. We have 46 million students in K through 12 in this country, and only 25% of them are successful or succeeding at the level that they can succeed in college as well. So that's what I based my statements on. Now then, what do I feel about creating smaller schools? I don't know how we would afford it, but I was asked by Ross Perot what would I recommend as an ideal school system if I were doing it again to solve the kind of problems that I just described. I told him that I would not have an elementary school of more than 300 students so that every student had a one-to-one involvement, because that's our problem in today's society. And I would not have a high school of over 500, and I know the typical high school in this country is 2,000 now, not 500. But whatever size it is, I would break it down in units to where it was manageable. Just like you have to break a large school system down into units that are manageable. You have to break a large school. If you have 2,000 students, then you need to break it down into operating units that are small enough that every student can get personal attention. And whatever that takes to get that, there are several ways you can approach it. But ideally, if I could afford it, I wouldn't have a high school over 500 students. Because if you look at our cities, if you look at our size schools, you only have problems where there are large masses of people that's been thrown together with different values, different cultures, different ethnic groups, and so forth. And the only way you can deal with that is a one-on-one situation. Well, I see they're ringing a bell. It's been excellent to be with you, and I thank you for your time and attention. Thank you.